Hello, coaches. Welcome back to another episode of Coach Better Spotlight. Today, we're sharing our fourth episode in our ongoing series featuring educators working in international schools in the Asia region. The teachers, coaches, and school leaders on this call have been remote learning for up to 8 weeks already, and they have so much practical advice to share for educators just beginning the journey. Today, we talk about the ways that schools in China, Hong Kong, Korea, and Taiwan are evolving their remote learning experiences to respond to such extended timelines, from assessment to pedagogical shifts to virtual events to build community, and their best advice to manage long-term isolation and working from home. Today's Spotlight focuses on assessment and what the little steps that teachers are taking around the world to adjust to this new normal actually look like in their virtual classrooms. Watch or listen to our previous episodes to hear how things have evolved over time, and keep up with new posts and resources on our remote learning page, which I will link in the description box below. To hear the full conversation, subscribe to Coach Better wherever you get your podcasts, or head over to coachbetter.tv. All right, welcome back to another episode of Coach Better. Today we have another in our series about remote learning or emergency school closures with educators from around Asia who have been dealing with remote learning, teaching virtually for 8 weeks and below that. I think 8 weeks is our max in this room, but if I'm wrong, please correct me. And we have a great group of educators here from all different countries around the Asia region with all varieties of experiences and different kinds of structures and setups for their remote learning. So I'm just going to go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves. And I know all of our podcast listeners already know Clint, but Clint, you're just right there on my screen. So Clint, say hello and where your school is and that kind of stuff.
Hi, it's Clint Hamada. I'm the Educational Technology Coordinator at the International School of Beijing, but I have been in Australia for the last 8+ weeks, helping to deliver distance learning to all of our students and supporting all of our amazing teachers and staff.
Awesome, thank you. And I see Tanya next.
Hi, I'm Tanya LeClaire. I'm in Seoul, Korea. I'm a high school digital learning coach at Seoul Foreign School.
Thank you. And next I see Panna.
Hi, I'm Panna Asavavatana, and I am the Pre-K to 1 technology and design coach at Taipei American School.
And I think Panna might be the only person on this call who's actually in regular school session right now.
We just closed again for a week.
Oh, okay. But is it spring break or like closed?
We had spring break and then we decided not to open up after spring break. Today was the first day where we went back into a closure just for another week. I can explain why, but we can do that later.
Awesome. Okay, great. Sandra is next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Sandra Chow. I'm the Director of Innovation and Digital Learning at Keystone Academy in Beijing, like Clint. And although Clint isn't in Beijing right now, I am still in Beijing. And we are just done our 8th week of online learning and currently on a break from online learning.
Awesome. Thank you. And next I see Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Garrett. I'm the upper primary ed tech coach at Hong Kong International School, and we've completed 8 consecutive weeks of online learning. We're in our 9th, and we are looking forward to spring break next week.
Awesome. And I see Anna Lee next, and then we'll finish with Jeff.
Hi, I'm Annalie Higginbottom. I am the K-12 Technology Coordinator at Shanghai American School's Pudong campus, and I'm also a secondary school technology instructional coach. Like Sandra, we have also just completed 8 weeks of distance learning, and we are also on spring break, which is a welcome relief.
And Jeff.
I'm Jeff Lehman. I'm a middle school design teacher at the International School Beijing, and one of the benefactors of all of Clint's awesome support.
Nice. So at the end of our last call, we had so many people. At the end of the call, we really wanted to talk about assessment, but we had already been chatting for a whole hour and people were kind of mentally taxed. And so we thought, let's have another call and talk about the end of year. What does assessment look like? And at this time, we didn't know what was going to happen with IB exams. So right before we started this conversation today, we decided that we wanted to start with talking about assessment. So what are schools doing at this moment in time? What do you foresee coming towards the end of the year? What does assessment look like? What does reporting look like? Anybody jump in and tell us what's going on in your school?
Well, I guess I can jump in first because I'm working with the IB and the DP, but it's actually still a question mark because we were on our spring break last week and the news about the DP exams being canceled came through and no one was there. We were all on our break, I guess, but we were in our houses. And today was really the first discussion of it. So people are really just, gathering their thoughts. We're trying to see what's going to happen with school opening. The government seems to keep pushing by 2 weeks and 2 weeks. So it's really hard to forward plan when you don't know how long you're going to be virtual for. We definitely know no matter what, those aren't happening. So there's some talks with different department groups and, heads of departments on what might happen, but that's still, we're just like, I heard this quote somewhere, we're building the plane as we're flying it. So not quite sure yet.
I can pick up from there a little bit. We started several weeks ago prior to the IB announcement to put plans in place for the oral language assessments in French, Spanish, and Chinese. And so we are actually moving ahead with those oral language assessments, even though the DP exams are not going to take place. And our academic council, which is our high school leadership team, met last week to begin really digging into this idea of what could the end of the year look like. With DP exams off the table, with AP, we operate on a kind of fusion model. So we also have AP and we also have some of our own internal exams. So as a kind of academic leadership team, we've started to kind of explore a few different options and those conversations are taking place on both of our campuses because whatever decision is made is going to be it's going to be the same outcome for both campuses. So we're kind of exploring some options in terms of, what our traditional model is, what might be an alternative approach. But we're kind of at very early stages of batting those conversations around. And like Tanya, so much of it will depend on what we are allowed to do. Are we allowed to get access to campus? And what does that then look like? And what does it require and involve?
I think for us at International School of Beijing and conversations that I'm having with people in other schools as well, in addition to the diploma exams, which, is this end of year, very large event for our grade 12 students, it's what does the just ongoing assessment look like? What does a valid assessment look like in an e-learning environment? How do we need to think about perhaps either taking the assessments that we've traditionally given at the end of units or at the end of any learning period and turning those into digital formats? Or how do we even reconceive what those assessments could look like? Do they still need to be that same kind of traditional assessment that we've always given? And if we give a traditional assessment, whether it's a end of unit math test or sort of your end of unit Chinese test or whatever it may be, how do we ensure its validity, and is that the best way to do this in the current environment?
Yeah, if I can pick up from there, our school we've been doing a lot of training, and some of the things that we've been talking about is how to support our teachers in the assessments. And there's a lot of really cool assessments that have been happening, the formative assessments in our school, including we just did an interdisciplinary unit in the secondary level, which was our Keystone Model UN. And that was a fantastic example of what we actually want summative assessments or to look like, where they were collaborating together. We were using Teams meetings, and the students came on all dressed up, all formal, and represented the different nations that they were trying to dialogue about. It's exactly what we want to move teachers into normally in a normal school setting. And the fact that it was happening online was really exciting. But we still have a lot of teachers in the mindset that everything has to be a test or an assessment. And even in assessment, we were trying to move them to the idea of, well, let's do open book and not have to worry about academic integrity, which a lot of teachers were really worried about. And they're like, no, we have to do some of these. And I didn't want to argue with them. So here we have like them testing with a camera on the side, trying to, make sure the kids aren't cheating. And it's complex, and it's a lot of work. And you're trying to look into all these exam tools that, don't allow them to move into another browser. And in my heart of hearts is just not good assessment practice. And so trying to move people away from that. So in terms of our training, I mean, Clint worked with me on an infographic recently where we were just trying to talk about what kind of training we want to give teachers next, and definitely that assessment and feedback, and giving students and teachers strategies for, helping each other with peer feedback as well as teacher feedback. I think those are the things that we really want to help teachers to know how to use the tools better now that they know the tools, how to use it in a good way.
This conversation, if I can jump in, is reminding me, like Gary Sager just put out an article, I don't know if you saw recently, about this is our moment. And I feel like all this conversation, it's exciting. It's kind of unknown, and it's shifting a lot of people. It's forcing people to shift in ways they may not be comfortable doing. But the big idea of his article is that this is our moment as educators, right? There's shifts that have been needing to happen in education. And this has sort of forced everyone to shift whether they wanted to or not. So now what do we do with that shift, and where do we move forward? And in my role at HKS, I'm in the primary division. So thankfully it's not been quite as focused on those final DP summatives in my experience, but I think we're having similar conversations of how do you really assess student learning and growth. I feel like something our teachers have done really well is providing a lot of timely feedback. They've worked round the clock to give formative feedback, summative feedback. Like we're looking at assessments and assignments in a variety of lenses. And one thing that our teachers, and we've been encouraging them to push our students to demonstrate your learning. So not just giving the answer how, but how you got there and why you got there as well are important. And that's something, again, like what we want our teachers to be feeling as they assign work. It's also we want our students to be doing that naturally as well. But sometimes in the regular routine of things, it doesn't always get focused on quite as much. And now we're in this position where if we don't know how and why they got the answer, then we don't know for sure if that's really an accurate description of their learning. And so it's been really powerful conversations and connections between our teachers and students. And we've, as a division, we've been having some team leader meetings about what our report cards are going to look like. And one thing we've done to help lead up to that is to have our instructional coaches in each content area help prioritize standards. So I feel like our assessments are falling more naturally into place because our coaches stepped in right away at the beginning and helped sort through the curriculum clutter that sometimes weighs us down, especially at the end of the year where you're like, oh, I can't get to that unit this year. All those things that seem extra, they've kind of helped eliminate all the clutter and help teachers focus in on like the most essential core standards we want to cover. And as a result, our assessments are reflecting those directly. And I feel like that's been a huge benefit for our staff moving towards the end of the year as well.
Yeah, you teach a very practical subject, right? You teach design. What does assessment look like in a and my wife teaches PE. She's not on the call, obviously, but she teaches PE, and we sort of have these conversations over dinner or over cups of tea or whatever. What does assessment in a practical subject look like in a virtual or an online learning environment?
I've sort of taken the strategy at sort of dividing my content up into what's like theoretical and what can be shown digitally and what can't very easily. So I've assessed things that kids can share with me. So things like sketches, brainstorming, things like that. And while I still ask them to create, a little object at home, I'm not assessing that because, frankly, like there's nothing to assess. I haven't taught them anything. I'm not there to teach them how to make stuff. So it just doesn't feel fair or like there's a point. So I just sort of kind of looked at my standards and I divided them into what can I teach, and then I assess those things. And then the rest, I have them do it anyway. It's great practice. I can give you feedback, but I'm not gonna assess you on it. I'm not gonna, put it on a report, anything like that.
So hearing all of you talk about the different ways that your schools are addressing these issues really makes me think about how are we helping, like Sandra was saying in her heart of hearts, this isn't what good practice or good assessment practice looks like. How are we helping? And Jeff clearly has a different, like he's able to make that distinction for himself and figure out what's appropriate for his very practical course, right? So you can see there's got to be some teachers who get it, that it's not fair for me to assess them on every single thing, but not everybody in the schools that we work with are going to be on that same page. How should we be, or how are you, or is it too stressful right now to even have this conversation? Like Amy's point about Gary Stager's point being, now is our chance. Like, I agree. I think this is going to shift a lot of aspects of educational practice in the future, but I also am so conscious of the high levels of stress on everyone. And just the thought, listening to Sandra talk about the teachers, having a camera back here, my heart also did like a little loop-de-loop and was like, oh God. But at the same time, those teachers are just coping with the situation that they have in the moment with the best possible tools that they have access to that they can think of. So is now the time for us to push this conversation forward? If it is, what do we say? And if it's not, what do we do instead?
I think that
early on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Okay, I'll just be quick. I think that really it depends on the school, first of all, and your culture. I think for me, in my context, this might be that window into possibilities and the different ways of thinking and the different ways of looking at tools and how they might, maneuver things differently in what we're looking for, or maybe cause us to ask different questions. But I think you're right. The stress of it all and the newness of it all. It might be the time to try it out and play around and tinker, but maybe those thoughts the actual change might come a little bit later once things have had time to settle. That's what I think might happen in my context.
Yeah, I would agree that the kind of cognitive load just in shifting pedagogy and understanding what it means to teach a course online when it's not what you've been trained for or prepared for, or even had time to think through, is huge. And at the same time, what I do see is teachers reaching out and saying, normally I would do this, I can't do this. Is there a way that I could try? Like, what could I do? And so we've been focusing a lot on sharing with teachers how they can use the existing tools that we have and that they've built familiarity with to do something a little bit different. It's a little bit of a step outside of the norm rather than a giant leap. And I think this is kind of the challenge at the moment. We have all of these, everybody's looking at a tool, and there are tools a go-go. And what I appreciate about our teachers is that they are reaching out to us as coaches and saying, hey, do you think this is valuable? Is this worth my time? And they're also very willing to kind of really dig into what we already have and that we've built familiarity with, to do something that's a little bit different, to facilitate a session where that a student is teaching and that 4 or 5 of their peers are on. And at the end of the session, their peers are giving feedback on the teaching that the student has just led, where we have teachers who are setting up routines and protocols with their students so that peer-to-peer feedback can happen on a live document. And so really thinking through what are the things that we can do with what we already have and know, and that gives a level of comfort and familiarity in what is a very uncomfortable, very vulnerable time for our educators.
And I think
sorry.
Go ahead.
For our school, I think that we have a huge culture of maintaining consistency. So a lot of my teachers look to the coaches, the coordinators, and the leadership for the decision. And, okay, so what are the key things? What do you want me to be looking for? And what should we be weeding out? And they wait. So we don't have as much of a culture of, let me try this on my own, because then I might look different from classroom next door with a parent who, and I have a twin in my classroom. So there's definitely fear behind that. Working with the youngest kids, it really has been, what is the essential data that we do want to find out if we can't have them in our classrooms? And what can we just get rid of? Because they'll survive if they don't know this at the end of the year. And we need to get them away from the screens as much as we can. So a lot of the decision starts from coaches and leadership, is brought to teams, and then feedback is given, adapted, and then executed. So I don't see us doing as much of this is the time to try something new, because it's just not the culture of our school. But at the same time, I think we're being very careful about what we are sending out there, because as it is very overwhelming for families. But hopefully we can get back to school after this week, so we won't have to worry about it.
And I was just thinking, it also depends very much on what stage are you in the online learning right now. And I keep coming back to Jennifer Wathel's Stages of E-Learning graphic, because I really like how it talks about, you're in firefighting, you're kind of just thriving or arriving kind of piece of things. And I think a lot of our friends who are currently in North America, who are just starting in that stage, they are in that firefighting mode. They're just trying to use the tools, or just trying to get the lessons out there. So they're not in the mindset to think about assessments and quality of what they're putting out there. They just want to put something out there at this point, because they're still surviving. But for many of us who are 7, 8 weeks, 6 weeks into things, we actually need to think about end of year now, and we are putting out our report cards, and that's foremost in our mind. So then the quality of what we're doing, and even the time we have left, is high in our mind. So when we design a lesson or an activity, you want it to cover something really well, and you want to put it out there and not waste the students' time. You actually want to make sure that it's quality and effective, what you're putting out there. And so I think things such as the approaches to learning that the IB uses becomes really important. I come from Ontario, and so when we were doing assessments, we had a document called the Growing Success Document. And when we looked at assessments, it always had to have a component of knowledge, of understanding, had to have communication, application, and thinking into it. And the approaches to learning are very similar. So if you're doing an assessment that's an exam, you don't have the social skills and the self-management. Well, you have some self-management, or the research skills. You don't have as many of those approaches to learning all wrapped up, bundled in one. Whereas if you do something rich, an activity like the Model UN that I was sharing about, it's natural that you cover all of those different approaches to learning, and it's a much richer assessment. And I think that's what is important to tell the teachers. You have very limited time with your students. How are you going to be able to cover these skills that are really important, and not just the knowledge and understanding piece of things?
I hope you enjoyed today's Spotlight episode. If you would like to hear the rest of the conversation, you can find it on our website at COACHBETTER.tv, or you can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we're curating all of this content on our remote learning page. I will drop the link in the description box below, so you can check out all of the previous conversations and see all of the other resources we are sharing there for you to help support you during this time. And we also have an amazing free offer that we're sharing for educators that I am going to talk about in just one moment. At Eduro, we have been humbled to have had educators from around the world join us in panel conversations and respond to our emergency school closures resources. We want to continue to support you. We know how challenging it is to be an educator right now. We know that school leaders and coaches are looking for ways to keep their community inspired and to relentlessly build community. That's why we've made our online course, Your Connected Classroom, free for you and your peers right now. You can find the link in the description box below. We have been creating community virtually for over a decade now through our Coattail program and through the Coach Microcredential. It's something we know inside and out, and we want to support you through this difficult time. Follow us at Eduro Learning or subscribe to the Coach Better podcast to continue this conversation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.